Well, I guess that's it. With the release of the film No Time to Die came the end of Daniel Craig's Bond saga, and with it, the closure of the overall themes and philosophical conflict which made up this incarnation's characterization. There is no doubt that this characterization seems very different to the other interpretations, not only tonally disparate, but also divergent in the very purpose of the character. In this essay, we will look at the difference in the overall purpose of the original Bonds and Craig's incarnation, how that difference manifests itself, when they overlap, and how they compare to the purpose of Ian Fleming's original Bond. Just a quick spoiler warning for all of Daniel Craig's Bond films, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Goldfinger, and some other original Bond films. The biggest difference between Daniel Craig's Bond and all the others is a difference in genre. Craig's saga is firmly established as an action tragedy, with each film leaving Bond more hurt, betrayed, and scarred than the one before. His retelling is founded in realism, doing away with many of the comic aspects of the original films. The older incarnations, on the other hand, serve as a kind of fantasy world for the audience. Bond is an icon, the perfect Briton, acting as the Prince Charming of his own fairy tale. One of the reasons the original Bonds have such gravitas is because he is everything some people want to be. He has the charm, the confidence, humour, skill, and looks which many people wish they had. This fairy tale-like structure is solidified by many creative decisions, each one contrasted by the decisions made for the Craig films. All these decisions stem from one choice: the choice between episodic and serialized storytelling. Episodic storytelling is when each episode tells a unique story apart from the other installments. Consequences from one chapter almost never bleed into the next. The happenings are completely confined to a single episode. Serialized storytelling, on the other hand, is when each installment partakes in telling a single, unified story. A good example of episodic storytelling is Phineas and Ferb, and a good example of serialized storytelling is Stranger Things. The original Bond films are almost completely episodic, allowing each installment to stand on its own, enabling the audience to enter the world of Bond at almost any point. It also allowed for an easy transition between Bond incarnations, because the next actor didn't have to pick up the story where the previous actor left off. They could simply start a new episode apart from any previous happenings. Any mention of the previous stories was limited to a humorous callback, such as Lazenby's line,
"This never happened to the other fella,"
in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. This administrative blessing was of course removed from Craig's saga due to the serialization of his films. Because each film acted as another part in a single narrative, the saga had to conclude the story definitively, to make way for the next incarnation and minimize audience confusion. This task has led to the semi-controversial death of the British super spy, his first death in history. The episodic nature of the originals also removed the severity of any consequences, each mistake, betrayal, or character death not surpassing a single film. For example, Tracy Bond wasn't mentioned after her death in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, despite it being one of the most tragic events in Bond's life. This lack of consequences adds to the fairy tale-like tone of the films, allowing the audience to relax while viewing, as they know nothing truly bad will ever happen to Bond. After this film, he'll be back to normal. This style is drastically contrasted by Craig's saga. The most obvious example of lasting consequences is the death of Vesper Lynd from Casino Royale. She is mentioned in every subsequent Craig film, along with other major character deaths and villain appearances. These consequences, and James' struggle with them, not only constructs a far more realistic tone, but also a far more tragic one. Instead of Bond simply forgetting character deaths and betrayal from film to film, Craig's Bond has to try and mentally reconcile these things. This trauma builds in Craig's saga, resulting in the first act of No Time to Die. In this act, James Bond is happily in love with Madeleine Swann, but after being almost blown up by Spectre, Bond returns to Swann and accuses her of being a traitor. She tries to convince him otherwise, but he doesn't listen, eventually sending her on a train, never to see her again. This reaction is a direct consequence of the trauma Bond faced with Vesper Lynd. Vesper was the only other person Bond let himself love, and after she betrayed him, he shut off his heart for good, quickly removing any feelings for her.
Job's done. The is dead.
This action was only undone by the appearance of Madeline Swan, who he fell in love with. So when doubt was cast on her loyalty, he immediately shut off his heart and sent her away. This use of trauma in Bond's story completely changes the tone of the films from one of fun fantasy to heartbreaking tragedy. The repeated mention of Vesper Lynd also shows another difference in the Bond incarnations, the issue of objectification. In the original Bond movies, Bond's objectification of women has almost no consequences at all, allowing him to have a relationship with anyone he wants without paying any price. Even when Bond's actions did result in an issue, such as with Jill Mattison's murder in Goldfinger, Bond quickly shrugs it off and the story hurries along. This furthers the fantastical nature of these stories, acting as a sort of pipe dream for a large portion of Bond's audience. This issue is not entirely removed from Craig's Bond, his nature as a womanizer now stapled firmly as one of Bond's character traits. But there is a large progression in how the story itself deals with its female characters. As I've mentioned, Vesper Lynd is discussed throughout the series, and characters like Moneypenny are characterized with more independence, depth, and worth. Of course, there is also the introduction of new skillful and independent female characters, such as Paloma and the new 007. These changes help reframe Bond, turning him away from being simply an icon who lives the male audience's fantasies, and changes him into a more realistic character, one who does see more worth in women, enough to remember them and enough to respect them as fellow agents. The fantasy and tragedy genres of these films are further cemented through the film's differences in how they glorify Britain and its government. In Craig's incarnation, Bond is very demystified to the righteousness of the government. In almost every film, Bond goes rogue, disobeying the orders of M and continuing his mission. Although Bond's independence is a trait present in every incarnation of Bond, and he does disobey M in many other films, Craig's incarnation doesn't glorify the government as much as the others. For example, in No Time to Die, M is the person who created the poison which Bond has to stop from destroying the human race, ultimately leading to Bond's death. The older versions of Bond also act more out of a sense of patriotism, whereas Craig's Bond acts more out of a personal necessity. This is mainly due to the politicizing of the film's villains. Because all the Bond films, despite Craig's, were created in the Cold War, many of the antagonists were Russian. This political agenda necessitated an increase in patriotism displayed in Bond, so that there might be an increase in patriotism in the audience. It also resulted in the extreme characterization of the villains. Each had their own gimmick, and were more akin to comic book supervillains than realistic threats. This, of course, was to characterize all Russians as evil and maniacal lunatics. Craig's Bond, however, does not hold this agenda, as it was made after the Cold War. This more realistic characterization in the villains, and a more demystified Bond, results in a less politically charged and comic book style character, and a more gritty, cynical Bond. This difference in genre can also be seen through the film's title tracks. The earlier Bond films had more fun songs, such as The Living Daylights by a-ha and Thunderball by Tom Jones. Even the more serious tracks like Goldfinger and Live and Let Die don't hold the same melancholic, traumatized tone as Craig's tracks. For example, Billie Eilish's No Time to Die is essentially a heartbreak song, the lyrics telling the tragedy of the first act of the film with the same name. Hans Zimmer also uses this theme as Bond and Swan's love theme throughout the movie, acting as a constant warning to the audience that this will ultimately result in heartbreak. In the end, Madeline will leave alone, just as Eilish predicts. The outcome of this major difference in genre not only affects these films tonally, but also changes the meaning and purpose of the character of Bond. As we've discussed, the original Bonds serve as a fantasy character which the audience wish they could be, whereas Craig's Bond is portrayed as an eternal hero. Craig's Bond saga is steeped in tragedy, each installment adding to the character's depression. From the first film, Casino Royale, it is established that Bond desires love more than anything else. This is shown when he resigns from the service to go on holiday with Vesper Lynd. As already mentioned, the betrayal and death of Vesper results in permanent trauma for Bond. The next two films show Bond trying to deal with this trauma in some capacity. But with the introduction of Madeline Swan in Spectre, Bond decides to open his heart again. The end of Spectre and the beginning of No Time to Die seem to give Bond everything he ever wanted. a happy life with someone he loves. But that quickly disintegrates with the perceived betrayal of Swan. When the two are reunited later in the film, Bond and Swan attempt to rekindle their romance, and Bond displays a rare moment of vulnerability to her. The rest of the film is steeped in tension, as the audience fearfully wonders whether Bond will ever receive the love he so desperately wants. But in the end, we are given a most painful answer. The plot of No Time to Die acts as a subtle piece of metafiction, the genetically specific poison quickly turning from a simple weapon into a commentary on the character of Bond. We see this when Bond is tragically infected with poison, designed only to kill Swan and his daughter. Bond is told that he will never be able to touch either of them again. He is outrightly forbidden the happy life he wants. This acts as a reflection to the identity of the character of Bond. He is never allowed to be happy. No matter how close he gets to love, he will always lose it. He lost it with Vesper, and now he's lost it with Madeline. There is also a third time Bond came tantalizingly close to his dream, and that was in the book and film on Her Majesty's Secret Service. After falling in love, Bond gets married, the only time in Bond's life, and begins to drive home a happy man. And after pulling over to remove some of the flower chains decorating their car, his wife, Tracy Bond, reflects that Bond has given her more than a husband. She now has a future. But this future is brutally cut short when a drive-by attack leaves Tracy dead. As Bond holds her, a policeman stops by after hearing the shooting. Bond tells him that there's no hurry, and that they have all the time in the world. This leads me to the use of the song We Have All the Time in the World by Louis Armstrong. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the song acts as the most bitter of love songs, the love song Bond wishes was about him, but will never be. Hans Zimmer used this idea to tragic effect in his score for No Time to Die. In Act 1, the theme plays after Bond happily tells Swan, "We have all the time in the world," and acts as a joyous melody of love to an unsuspecting audience. But at the end of the film, we realize that this song once again is the most bitter of love songs, Bond's last words being, "You have all the time in the world." Bond cannot partake in Madeline's happiness. He is forbidden to receive love, and this song represents that bitter sadness. And so the film ends with the original rendition of the song from Her Majesty's Secret Service. The film No Time to Die is thematically paralleled to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and the parallels don't stop with the music. In No Time to Die, Felix Leiter tells Bond that he is no longer on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and we can see in one of the scenes a portrait of the original M from Lazenby's film. No Time to Die takes care to link these two films, tying them together as the two most tragic Bond films, the films where he got closest to his dream. Bond is a tragic hero, not only in Craig and Lazenby's films, but also, to a less extent, in the books. In the novel The Living Daylights, Fleming writes, "Look, my friend," said Bond wearily, "I've got to commit a murder tonight. Not you, me. So be a good chap and stuff it, would you? Think I like this job? Having a 00 number and so on? I'd be quite happy for you to get me sacked from the 00 section. Then I could settle down and make a snug nest of papers as an ordinary staffer, right?" But Bond can't settle down. He can't be sacked from the 00 section. Not for more than a whole film, anyway. He is forced to find the only solace he can in his work, the pain of not receiving the love he wants, remedied only slightly by his work. We see this when Fleming writes in his book From Russia with Love. He was a man of war, and when, for a long period of time, there was no war, his spirit went into decline. In his particular line of business, peace had reigned for nearly a year, and peace was killing him. This time between missions is always a dangerous time for Bond in the books, often causing him to fall into depression and self-hatred. For example, Fleming writes in the opening pages of Thunderball, "Again, Bond dabbed with the blood-stained styptic pencil at the cut on his chin, and despised the face that stared sullenly back at him from the mirror above the wash basin. Stupid, ignorant bastard." Bond is a character eternally bound to his heroics, because it is the only therapy he has found. Even though he may be able to get with any woman he wants, he can never settle down with them. He can never find the happiness he wants. That's why Fleming said, "Bond is not a hero, nor is he depicted as being very likable or admirable. He's not a bad man, but he is ruthless and self-indulgent. He enjoys the fight, but he also enjoys the prizes. The fight and the prizes are the only thing he can enjoy. His heroics aren't founded entirely on morality or kind-heartedness, but, like Sherlock Holmes, he is bound to his work because he has to do it. Without it, there is nothing for him in life. In conclusion, Bond's profession and life is so traumatic in nature that there are only two ways with dealing with the character. Either he ignores the trauma, facilitated by the episodic nature of the originals, or he struggles with it, necessitated by the serial nature of Craig's films. This is the fundamental difference in the two versions, and this difference results in a different meaning of the character. The originals acts as an icon of the audience's fantasy, being the person they want to be and living the fantasies they want to live. Craig's Bond acts as an eternal hero, closer to the likes of Holmes and Batman than the traditional movie Bond. Both these interpretations are very valuable in themselves, and there is a large overlap between the two. Craig's Bond still lives the fantasies the audience wants to live, and is still someone the audience wants to be. And some original Bond films portray a similar eternal hero, such as the case of Her Majesty's Secret Service. To me, Bond is a fun, charming super spy, and the coolest Briton imaginable. But at his heart, he's a reluctant hero. He's cursed eternally, forbidden from obtaining the love he truly wants, and so settles for saving the world.
We have all the time in the world, time enough for life to unfold all the precious things love has in store.
One large aspect to why people, including myself, love watching and rewatching the original Bond films, which I have not mentioned, is the impact of nostalgia. Nostalgia is an incredibly powerful force in why people like certain things, but it's so impactful that it deserves an essay all for itself.